May 1942. Two enemy fleets search a vast and empty sea, neither ever glimpsing the other, yet the fate of Australia and the entire South Pacific hangs in the balance. The Battle of the Coral Sea wasn't just the world's first all-carrier clash. It was a gamble to sever Allied lifelines and tip the war's outcome. But how did a contest fought by unseen ships become a turning point no one saw coming? The answer begins with a single ambitious plan, and with a gateway the world could not afford to lose. The Coral Sea stretches between Australia, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands, a crossroads where the Pacific narrows into a single, vital corridor. In early 1942, this stretch of ocean became the focus of both Japanese and Allied planners. Control of these waters meant control of the shipping lanes that kept Australia supplied with food, fuel, and weapons from the United States. For Japan, pushing southward was more than ambition. It was a strategy to cut Australia off from the rest of the Allies, and to force a wedge between American bases and the last major foothold in the Southwest Pacific. Maps from the time show a relentless tide. Japanese forces had swept through Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies, capturing territory after territory in just months. Each new conquest brought their airfields and naval bases closer to Australia's northern coast. The Coral Sea was the last natural barrier. If Japanese warships could pass through, Port Moresby would fall, and the path to Australia would be wide open. Allied supply convoys, already under threat, would become nearly impossible to protect. For the people of Australia and New Zealand, the sense of isolation grew with every Japanese advance. This ocean, once a distant backdrop, now became the front line. But the battle that would decide its fate would not be fought by ships exchanging broadsides at close range. Instead, aircraft launched from distant carriers would search for targets hundreds of miles away, guided by radio reports and fleeting glimpses from scout planes. The ships themselves might never come within sight of the enemy. The Coral Sea became the testing ground for a new kind of naval warfare, one where AIR power, not gunfire, would decide the outcome. The urgency was clear to every commander and sailor in the region. The stakes were not just territorial, they were logistical and existential. Lose the Coral Sea, and the Allied lifeline to Australia might snap. Hold it, and there was still hope to turn the tide. Everything depended on who could control this gateway, and on new tactics that the world had never seen in action before. In Tokyo in spring 1942, a sense of momentum filled the Imperial Navy. Planners gathered around maps, tracing the next step in their Pacific campaign. Their goal was Port Moresby, a small outpost on the southern coast of New Guinea, but a key that could unlock the entire South Pacific. If Port Moresby fell, Japanese bombers could threaten northern Australia, and supply lines from the United States to Australia would be exposed. Allied resistance in the region could be cut off at the roots. Operation MO, set out in staff memoranda, laid out a bold and complex plan. The invasion force would not travel as a single mass. Instead, it would be divided into several task groups, each with its own objective. The main convoy, carrying thousands of troops and escorted by cruisers and destroyers, would head directly for Port Moresby. To the east, a covering force including the fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku and the light carrier Shoho would screen the invasion route and hunt for any Allied ships that might intervene. A separate detachment would seize Tully, a tiny island in the Solomons, to serve as a new seaplane base and forward outpost for further operations. This dispersal reflected both confidence and calculation. Japanese staff believed their carriers and air crews were unmatched, recent victories in Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies reinforcing that view. The plan depended on speed and surprise. If each group moved swiftly and communication held, Port Moresby would be taken before the Allies could concentrate a response. Imperial orders emphasized the need for simultaneous advances, no delays, no hesitation. Yet, beneath the surface, the plan carried risks. Dividing the fleet across hundreds of miles made coordination difficult. Radio silence, intended to preserve surprise, slowed the flow of information between groups. Some staff officers warned that if the covering carriers were separated from the invasion convoy, the transports could be left exposed to enemy attack. Admiral Yamamoto himself expressed concern that dispersed forces might not be able to support each other if the enemy appeared unexpectedly. Still, the operation moved forward. Convoys left Rabaul and Taruk in late April, ships fanning out across the Coral Sea. Japanese commanders believed their code systems were secure and that their movements would go undetected. The fleet's confidence was real, but so was the vulnerability built into their plan. As the ships advanced, the fate of Port Moresby and the balance of the Pacific hung on whether this intricate web of task groups could hold together under pressure. Inside a windowless room at Pearl Harbor, a handful of men hunched over intercepted radio signals. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his codebreakers at Station HIPO sifted through streams of encrypted Japanese traffic, piecing together fragments with pencils and intuition. This was quiet, relentless intelligence work. Across the ocean in Melbourne, the joint Allied team at Frumel did the same, racing to break the JN-25 code before the enemy plans became reality. In late April 1942, their efforts converged. A series of decrypted messages described the assembly of a powerful naval force, the movement of the carriers Shokaku, Zuikaku, and Shoho, and repeated references to an operation called MO. The language was cautious, never spelling out targets, yet coordinates and call signs pointed toward Port Moresby and the Coral Sea. Each breakthrough was cross-checked and summarized in daily intelligence reports. Rochefort's team flagged a message on April 29th that placed Japanese carriers south of Truk, headed for the Coral Sea. By May 1st, Admiral Chester Nimitz had the evidence he needed. Orders went out. Task Force 17, under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, would move to intercept. Rear Admiral Aubrey Fitch, commanding the carrier Lexington, was ordered to rendezvous in the same waters. The Allied fleet began to shift, guided not by sightings or rumors, but by the quiet certainty of signals intelligence. On May 2nd and May 3rd, further decrypts confirmed the Japanese timetable. Allied planners now knew that the enemy carriers and the invasion convoy would soon converge near Port Moresby. The challenge was to position their own forces without tipping their hand. Fletcher's task force, including the carriers Yorktown and Lexington, slipped into the Coral Sea, shadowed by Australian cruisers and destroyers. Every movement was calculated to intercept the invasion route, yet avoid detection. Fuel was rationed, patrols were launched, and the radio room became the nerve center of the operation. The intelligence war was far from simple. Messages arrived incomplete or out of order. Analysts debated the meaning of MO and the composition of enemy forces. Yet as May 4th approached, the evidence pointed to a single, urgent conclusion. The Japanese fleet was coming, and the Allies had a fleeting chance to meet them head-on. The outcome would depend not just on ships and aircraft, but on the invisible battle fought in cipher rooms, where a handful of crypt analysts steered entire fleets across the Pacific. At dawn on May 7, 1942, The search for the enemy grew frantic. Pilots from both sides climbed into the sky, scanning a vast, empty ocean, each convinced the next shadow on the water could be a carrier group. That morning, a Japanese scout plane spotted two ships far from the main action: a refueling oiler, USS Neosho, and her escort, the destroyer USS Sims. Through the haze, the pilot radioed back that an enemy carrier and cruiser were sighted. This single mistake set off a chain of events that would shape the day. Japanese commanders, acting on the report, launched a strike force of nearly 70 aircraft, loaded for a major carrier engagement. Dive bombers and torpedo planes swept in over Neosho and Sims just before midday. The two ships, isolated and outgunned, fought back with every gun they had. Within minutes, Sims was overwhelmed by multiple direct hits, breaking apart and sinking quickly. The ship suffered heavy losses among her crew. Neosho, battered by bombs and burning, stayed afloat, her crew scrambling to control fires and send distress signals as the ship drifted and settled lower in the water. Survivors clung to hope while waiting days before rescue arrived. The Japanese strike, meant to cripple American carriers, had spent its fury on auxiliary ships. While the Japanese searched for their real quarry, American scout planes found a more valuable target. Reports came in that a Japanese light carrier, Shoho, was moving with her screening force. Orders went out to the air groups from Yorktown and Lexington. Pilots gathered on the flight deck, checking maps and attack plans, knowing that this was their chance to hit first. The attack unfolded in waves. Dive bombers rolled in from high altitude, followed by torpedo planes skimming the waves. Bombs and torpedoes struck home, tearing through Shoho's decks and machinery. Within minutes, the carrier was dead in the water. Smoke poured from her hull as she listed heavily, unable to launch or recover aircraft. The message went out over the radio, a short, triumphant phrase that spread through the fleet and back to headquarters. For the first time in the Pacific War, a Japanese carrier had been lost. Among American pilots, the mood shifted from tension to a hard-won confidence, but the sense of uncertainty lingered. Pilots and commanders knew the enemy's main carriers were still somewhere out there, searching, just as they were. The day had delivered both loss and victory, but the real test was still to come. May 8, 1942. On the Coral Sea, tension ran high as dawn broke over the carriers. Mechanics checked fuel lines and bomb racks with practiced hands. Ordnance crews loaded torpedoes and bombs, sweat mixing with the sharp scent of aviation fuel. Pilots on Yorktown and Lexington listened to final briefings, faces set, nerves taut. Across the water, Shokaku and Zuikaku's crews moved with the same urgency, prepping their own strike groups. At 900 hours, the order echoed across every deck. Launch all planes. Engines thundered. Deck crews signaled, guiding fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes into position. Each aircraft had a target, each squadron a plan. The launches came in rapid waves, the tempo unyielding. Pilots taxied forward, eyes fixed ahead, every second precious. Planes climbed into the sky, fanning out over the ocean, searching for the enemy before being found themselves. Contact came almost at once. Yorktown's SBD Dauntless dive bombers spotted the Japanese carriers just as Japanese scouts fixed the U.S. fleet's position. Both sides committed everything. In the next hour, the sky filled with crossing aircraft, each pilot focused on his mission, knowing a single mistake could doom the fleet below. Yorktown's strike group reached Shokaku just after 1100 hours. Dive bombers rolled into steep dives, braving bursts of anti-aircraft fire. 2 bombs punched through Shokaku's flight deck, igniting fuel and sending burning debris flying. Lexington's bombers followed, scoring another hit. Flames tore across Shokaku's deck, crippling her ability to launch or recover planes. Damage control teams fought to contain the fires, dragging hoses through smoke, working in near silence but for shouted orders and the roar of burning fuel. Almost simultaneously, Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes reached Lexington and Yorktown. Fighters tangled overhead as bombers pressed their attacks. Lexington took 2 torpedo hits and 2 bombs in quick succession. Explosions rocked the ship. Fires broke out below decks. Damage control teams sealed off flooded compartments and fought the flames. On the flight deck, crewmen cleared wreckage, struggling to keep the few remaining planes ready for recovery. Communication lines buzzed with casualty reports and urgent calls for firefighting foam. Through chaos, discipline held. Pilots landed on decks slick with oil and debris, guided by deck crews waving paddles through smoke. Every decision carried the weight of hundreds of lives. In these minutes, the future of the Coral Sea and the Pacific hung in the balance. Naval staff pored over readiness reports in the hours and days after the fighting. The numbers told a story as stark as any after-action report. Shokaku, battered by direct bomb hits, limped away from the Coral Sea, unable to launch or recover planes. But it was Zuikaku's situation that drew the most concern among Japanese planners. Her flight deck was intact, but her air group was not. More than half of Zuikaku's original pilots and air crew were lost, downed in combat, missing after ditching at sea, or too wounded to fly. Replacement crews could be found, but not in time for the next major battle. Carrier aviation demanded experience, and the loss of so many trained teams could not be made up with fresh graduates from flight school. The American side faced its own reckoning. USS Lexington had been lost. Her survivors were rescued, but her air group was scattered. Yorktown, though damaged, remained afloat and could be patched up quickly. U.S. Navy's pool of trained carrier airmen was strained, but not broken. Repair crews worked around the clock, patching flight decks and overhauling engines, knowing that another battle was already on the horizon. For the Japanese, the loss of Shoho and the crippling of Shokaku forced a hard decision. Admiral Yamamoto's staff reviewed the carrier rosters for the upcoming operation against Midway. Shokaku would need weeks in dry dock. Zuikaku, though physically undamaged, was left without enough seasoned air crew to be combat ready. Both carriers were ordered to return to Japan for repairs and reconstitution. The strike force that had seemed so formidable in April was now reduced to just 4 operational fleet carriers for the next campaign. This shortfall would have consequences far beyond the Coral Sea. At Midway, only Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu would sail to meet the American fleet. The absence of Shokaku and Zuikaku meant fewer planes available for strikes, and fewer experienced aviators to fly them. Japanese planners had counted on overwhelming force, but now attrition had quietly tipped the balance. The losses suffered over the Coral Sea, air crew, aircraft, and carrier decks could not be replaced in a matter of weeks. Every tally sheet, every roster, reflected a new reality. The margin for error had vanished. The next battle would be fought with what remained. Today, navies worldwide train for threats they may never see. Battles are now decided long before ships meet. The lessons of Coral Sea shape every carrier deployment, every intelligence breakthrough, every moment of tension in contested waters. In a world where unseen forces still decide outcomes, the true contest is often over before anyone realizes it began. What risks remain hidden beneath the surface, waiting to shape our future?